Everyone remembers the first time they heard that sound. For 30 years, every time we asked this engine for more, every time we pushed it past the point of sanity, it just smiled and answered. And if you don't get the hype yet, stick around. By the end of this, you will. Every year, car companies roll out something newer, faster, smarter, packed with microchips and lightweight materials. That's how progress is supposed to work, right? So why are we still obsessing over a heavy lump of iron from 1991? Think about it. Right now, as you're watching this, someone is spending more money on a 35-year-old Toyota engine than most people spend on a brand new car. And they're not doing it for a museum, they're buying them to rip them apart, cram them into old BMWs, Nissans, or drift missiles and beat the absolute living hell out of them. These aren't rich collectors keeping cars under silk covers. These are builders, tuners, people who are still to this day trying to find out what it takes to finally make this thing scream. What is it about this specific piece of Japanese engineering? See, the strange part wasn't that the 2JZ could make power. Lots of engines make power. The terrifying, beautiful part was that nobody could find its ceiling. Here's the cosmic joke at the center of the whole story. Toyota was not trying to build a tuning legend. They weren't trying to conquer underground drag racing or become the poster child for video games. Picture Japan in 1991, economies booming. Inside a quiet Toyota R&D facility, a team of engineers in white lab coats is trying to solve a very sensible, very corporate problem. They want to build a luxury engine that an owner will never, ever have to worry about. They wanted smooth, quiet, refined. The kind of engine that feels just as silky at 100,000 miles as it did the day it left the showroom. No drama, no surprises, just effortless, bulletproof dependability. They wanted to build something that would last. They had no idea they were building something people would spend decades trying to break. The result of that obsessive engineering was the 2JZ, a 3.0-liter inline-six. Now, regular cars got the naturally aspirated version, the GE. But the crown jewel, the twin-turbocharged GTE, found its home under the hood of the A80 Supra, the Mark IV. Wide hips, endless hood, and that massive rear wing that made it look like it was flying even when it was parked at a red light. Because of a gentleman's agreement among Japanese automakers back then, the GTE was officially rated at 276 horsepower. In the US, they let it breathe a bit more at 320. Respectable. Sure, but it wasn't going to set the world on fire. It was meant to be a high-end highway cruiser. Toyota built it to be reliable and immortal. So how did the 2JZ become a god among engines? Every single decision those Japanese engineers made to ensure reliability accidentally became a cheat code for monstrous power. They started with a cast iron block. Sure, it's heavier than aluminum, but iron doesn't flex when things get hot. It doesn't warp when you abuse it. It just sits there. Dense, stubborn, and unyielding. Toyota chose it so the engine wouldn't degrade over 15 years. Tuners looked at it and realized, wait, this means we can throw 600 horsepower at it and the block won't crack in half. Then they gave it a deep skirt design, wrapping the block casing tightly around the crankshaft. Why? To reduce vibrations and keep the car feeling premium at high mileage. But to a tuner, that rigidity meant the engine could handle boost pressures that would blow the cylinders clean off a lesser motor. And the crankshaft held down by 7 main bearings. Most engines of that era used 5. Toyota used 7 because they wanted to spread out the mechanical stress and keep things smooth. But less stress on the crank meant the bottom end of the engine could take a literal beating without flinching. They threw in a forged steel crankshaft because cast iron can get brittle over decades. They put oil squirters under the pistons to keep them cool during long highway drives. They topped it with a dual overhead cam 24-valve aluminum head and a sequential twin-turbo system. One small turbo for quick response around town, and a bigger one to take over when you stepped on it. They engineered for longevity, and by doing so, completely by accident, they handed the car world the strongest automotive foundation ever created. They just hadn't woken the monster up yet. So the Mark IV hits the streets. The keys get handed over to the aftermarket, and you already know what happens next. The moment a gearhead gets a hold of a turbo car, they ask the exact same question. Can I make it faster? They start with the basics. A cold air intake to let it breathe, a wide-open exhaust so the turbos can spool without restriction, a manual boost controller to screw down the wastegate, and a basic tune to adjust the fuel and timing. Nobody is opening the engine. Nobody is changing pistons or swapping cams. It's just bolt-ons and a computer tweak in a garage. You turn the boost knob. Can it do 400? Yeah, easily. Can it do 450? The 2JZ just takes it. 380, 420, 450 horsepower on a completely stock, untouched factory engine. They practically bypassed the engine's original output by doing nothing more than letting it breathe. Every time we asked for more, the engine just delivered. So, naturally, the questions got wilder. What happens if we really push it? Now come the bigger fuel injectors, massive fuel pumps to feed the beast, a standalone ECU to completely rewrite the engine's brain. They rip out the complex twin turbos and bolt on one massive trash can-sized single turbocharger backed by a front-mount intercooler the size of a billboard. Can it do 500? Yes. Can it do 600? Remember, the engine block is still sealed, the factory pistons, factory rods, factory head gasket. Let that sink in. The engine built to take a quiet trip to the grocery store is now pushing 600 horsepower on the exact same parts it left the factory with. Imagine being a mechanic in the late 90s. You pull a 600 horsepower run on the dyno. You don't celebrate. You actually get a little nervous. Because in the tuning world, trust is hard to come by. You're always waiting for the catastrophic bang. You're always waiting to find out what breaks first. And at 600 horsepower, something had to give, and surely this was the limit. And things did break. The factory clutch melted, the transmission snapped. The rear tires disintegrated into smoke, but the engine didn't even sweat. It didn't just survive, it mocked us. It made everyone realize they hadn't even come close to the edge. And that's the moment everything shifted. Because once a machine keeps saying yes, you stop asking if it can handle the power. And this is where the story gets beautiful. We start asking, where does the monster die? You only treat an engine like that when it has earned your absolute unwavering trust. You aren't afraid of it blowing up anymore, you're just fascinated by its limits. So, the community went to war. They filled the tanks with E85 and high-octane race fuel so they could crank the boost to astronomical levels. They bolted on even bigger turbos, heavy-duty head studs to literally clamp the engine together against the violent pressures inside the cylinders. They thought this setup would finally show them the limit. It didn't. 700 wheel horsepower, then 800. Around 800 horsepower, guys noticed the factory main bearing caps would start to walk and deform from the sheer violence of the crank spinning. But the actual block, the iron itself, the forged crank from 1991, it just absorbed the punishment. It kept asking for the next gear. To go further, the aftermarket had to take over where Toyota left off. Forged pistons built to survive volcanic heat, heavy-duty connecting rods, billet main caps to lock the bottom end down like a bank vault, custom ported heads to move air like a hurricane fueled by parallel fuel systems pumping gallons of gas a minute. Everyone thought this would be the breaking point. 1,000 horsepower, 1,200, still it held. And here's what people misunderstand about this era. Tuners weren't fixing Toyota's mistakes. They were just building a skyscraper on top of a foundation that refused to crack. On most engines, you hit a wall where the motor itself is the problem. With the 2JZ, the engine was never the problem, it was everything else. The clutch slips, upgrade it, the gears shred, swap the transmission. The engine just keeps waiting for you to catch up. That's how an engine stops being just a piece of metal under the hood and becomes a relationship. You push it, it holds. You trust it, it rewards you. It's those late nights in the garage, the smell of race gas, the tension right before a dyno pull, that back and forth becomes intensely personal. That's why people don't just like this engine, they worship it. Eventually, decades later, we found the ceiling. We had to invent billet aluminum blocks to replace Toyota's iron just to go further. Stroker kits, dry sump oiling systems, twin fuel rails, total mechanical overkill. 1,500 horsepower, 1,800, past 2,000 horsepower. Look, at 2,000 horsepower, it's not a factory 2JZ anymore, obviously. But the DNA, the architecture, the blueprints, It's still exactly what those men and women drew up in Japan back in 1991. The soul of the engine never changed. They wanted a car that would survive. They got exactly what they asked for, just multiplied by 1,000. Toyota stopped making the A80 Supra in 2002. The 2JZ GTE officially went out of production in 2005. Newer engines came out, and yet, what did the car world do? They kept hunting for 2JZs. We found something else hidden deep inside that cast iron block. They found a legend. Every dyno pull that defied physics, every late night spent covered in oil chasing another 50 horsepower, every legendary highway pull, every single time someone took a gamble on this engine. The engine just kept answering. The 2JZ became immortal because it never let us down.